We live in a world that worships movement. Action is praised. Achievement is glorified. Productivity is worn like armor against the silent terror of stillness. We are told that to be still is to be lazy, to do nothing is to waste time, and to pause is to fall behind. And so we chase. We chase goals, approval, perfection, security, often without knowing what it is we're really running toward or from. From the moment we are born, we are taught to reach. To reach for the bottle, for our parents' attention, for grades, for approval, for security, for more. We are not taught to be still, we are taught to strive. Life, from the very beginning, becomes a series of actions tethered to results. If I do this, I will get that. If I become this, I will be loved. If I fix this, everything will be okay. And so we enter into a kind of spiritual contract with the world. I will exhaust myself. I will stay vigilant. I will micromanage the future, if only you will protect me from chaos. This is where the illusion of control begins. It creeps in slowly, almost innocently. A small child hurt by the unpredictability of life learns to scan every room for signs of danger. A teenager, embarrassed by failure, becomes obsessed with perfection. An adult, betrayed by love, convinces themselves that if they choose carefully and plan thoroughly, they will never be hurt again, and thus we wear control like armor. But we fail to see that this armor does not protect us, it traps us. The illusion of control is comforting. It gives the impression that if we just work hard enough, if we just plan far enough ahead, if we can predict every outcome, we can avoid suffering. But this is a child's belief dressed in adult clothing. Control is not the antidote to chaos. It is a response to fear. And the more afraid we are, the more tightly we cling to it. Think of the clenched fist. It is the symbol of effort, of trying to hold on. But the tighter we close our hand, the less we can hold. Try to grasp sand or water with a closed fist, and it will slip through your fingers. But relax your hand and you can hold more than you ever imagined. Control behaves the same way. The more we try to dominate life, the more we lose its essence. Many people go through life thinking they are orchestrating every detail. They plan their relationships, their careers, their happiness, with a precision that borders on obsession. And then something unexpected happens. An illness, a heartbreak, a job loss, and the structure collapses. In that moment, many fall into despair. But some find something else. They find the quiet truth beneath all their striving. That they were never in control to begin with. There was a woman I once knew who had spent 20 years building a marriage she thought would last forever. She read every book, went to every seminar, tried every communication tool. She did everything right. And still, her partner left. She told me with tears in her eyes, "I did everything I could to control the outcome. I was so afraid to lose him that I lost myself." And yet, in the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. She stopped fighting. She stopped fixing. She let the grief wash over her like a tide she could not resist. And in that surrender, she began to find a stillness she had never known. For the first time, she said, "I'm not trying to hold everything together, and somehow nothing is falling apart. Maybe I wasn't supposed to hold it all in the first place." What she discovered was not defeat. It was liberation. The realization that control is not a requirement for safety. That the world continues to turn without our grip on it. That the sky does not fall when we release our grasp. In fact, it is only when we let go that we begin to feel the ground beneath our feet. This kind of surrender is not passive. It is not giving up or resigning ourselves to fate. It is a deeply conscious act of trust. Trust that life, in its vast intelligence, may know more than our fear does. It is the wisdom that comes when we step back and allow the river to carry us rather than trying to swim upstream against a current we were never meant to resist. To do nothing in this sense is not an abdication of responsibility. It is a redirection of energy, from anxious doing to mindful being. It is a shift from control to collaboration. We do not abandon effort, but we release the frantic grip on the outcome. We show up, we act, but we do not force. And in this space, a new kind of order begins to emerge, not one dictated by our need to manage every detail, but one revealed by the deeper intelligence of life itself. Look at nature. The trees do not force themselves to grow. They respond to the sun and the soil and the seasons. The tides do not control their own movement. They are guided by a rhythm far older than language. We, too, are part of this living system, but we have forgotten our place. We believe ourselves to be architects of fate, when in truth we are part of something far more mysterious and beautiful. And so the invitation is this. Let go of the idea that you must make everything happen. Rest your hands. Soften your gaze. Withdraw, just for a moment, from the battle of becoming. And observe. Watch what begins to shift when you stop forcing the answers. Watch how people reveal themselves when you are no longer trying to be someone. Watch how clarity arrives like a bird on your windowsill when you finally stop chasing it through the sky. To release the illusion of control is not to become powerless. It is to align with a deeper power. One that does not demand, but invites. One that does not shout, but whispers. One that says again and again, you are not lost, you are not late, everything is unfolding as it must. And in that moment of stillness you may begin to see, not with the eyes but with the soul, that nothing is missing and that nothing needs fixing. You may begin to feel, beneath the noise, a gentle rhythm guiding you home. To many, the idea of doing nothing carries a quiet sense of shame. We are conditioned to associate stillness with laziness, with wasting time, with irresponsibility. In a world that rewards motion, rest is often seen as weakness. And so we run, we push, we stretch ourselves thin in an effort to prove that we are enough. Enough to be loved, enough to be safe, enough to be seen. But beneath all of this movement, beneath all our striving, there exists a dimension of self that cannot be accessed through action alone. It waits, silently, for us to stop. Stillness is not passivity. It is not the absence of purpose. It is a deep, conscious presence that allows life to unfold on its own terms. It is not about neglecting responsibility, nor about avoiding the demands of existence. Rather, it is about allowing a different kind of movement to occur, an internal, reordering, a recentering of the self around something more enduring than ambition. Imagine a lake after a storm. The waters are wild, murky, disturbed. No reflection is possible until the surface becomes still. Then, and only then, does the lake mirror the sky. The same is true of the soul. When we are constantly reacting, constantly moving, we cannot see what lies beneath our surface. Our reflection becomes distorted by the turbulence of our thoughts. But in stillness we return to clarity. In doing nothing, not in avoidance, but in reverent attention, we allow the deeper truths of our being to rise to the surface. There are moments in life where answers do not come no matter how hard we search. Moments when our efforts yield no fruit, when the doors we knock on remain closed. In those times, the instinct is to push harder, to make something happen. But not all answers can be forced. Not all doors are meant to open through effort. Some are opened only through surrender. I once knew a man who had spent years trying to build a business. He read every book, followed every strategy, worked tirelessly day and night. Yet nothing seemed to work. He became bitter, exhausted, questioning whether he was even on the right path. And then one day, he stopped. Not out of wisdom, but because he was simply too tired to continue. He went to the mountains for a few days. No phone, no plans, no strategies, just silence. And in that silence, he found something he hadn't known he was missing. Himself. Not the version of himself defined by goals and results, but the one who remembered why he started in the first place. When he returned, something had changed. His work no longer came from desperation, but from alignment. And slowly, with less effort than before, things began to fall into place. This is the paradox of stillness. What seems like inaction is often the most active thing we can do on a soul level. It is the space where integration happens. The unconscious begins to speak. Emotions long buried rise to be felt. Thoughts once too subtle to notice begin to form into insights. There is a sacred intelligence that moves within us, but it cannot be heard over the noise. We must become quiet enough to listen. It is not an easy thing to be still. The world pulls at us with 1,000 demands. The mind whispers constantly, reminding us of all we have not yet done. The ego resists stillness because stillness dissolves the illusions it depends on. When we stop doing, we must face who we are without our roles, our titles, our distractions. This can be terrifying. But it is also the beginning of real freedom. In ancient cultures, periods of retreat were built into the rhythm of life. The mystics, the sages, even the ordinary people knew the importance of stepping away. Not forever, but for a time. To remember, to reconnect. They would go into nature, into solitude, into silence, not to escape, but to return. This wisdom has been largely lost in modern life, but it still lives in us, deep in our bones. We know, if we are honest, that there are seasons for action and seasons for stillness. And when we honor this natural rhythm, something within us begins to heal. There's a story of a farmer who plants his crops and then stands over them every day, shouting, "Grow!" He waters them excessively, rearranges the soil constantly, pulls on the leaves to check their progress. Eventually, the plants begin to die. Another farmer, his neighbor, plants the same seeds and simply waits. He waters them when needed. He gives them sun and shade. He does not interfere. His field thrives. The difference is not effort. It is trust. One forced growth. The other allowed it. We often do the same with our lives. We try to force healing, force love, force clarity. But the soul is not a machine. It grows in its own time, in its own way. Sometimes the best thing we can do is create the conditions for growth, and then step back, to nourish ourselves with rest, with honesty, with patience, to sit in the not knowing, without reaching for distraction, to feel our feelings without needing to resolve them immediately, to allow life to unfold without needing to write every chapter ourselves. Stillness teaches us patience, not the kind that grits its teeth and waits in frustration, but the kind that trusts the process even when the outcome is not yet visible. It teaches us humility, the understanding that we are not the sole architects of our lives, but participants in something larger, more mysterious. It teaches us presence, not as a buzzword, but as a lived experience of meeting each moment as it is, without resistance. When you do nothing with intention, with presence, you are not withdrawing from life. You are stepping more deeply into it. You are tuning yourself to its hidden rhythms. You are saying, "I do not need to force my becoming. I am already becoming just by being here." This is not laziness. It is a radical act of alignment. If you've ever watched a wounded animal in the wild, you'll notice it doesn't pace in panic. It retreats to a quiet place. It rests. It lets the body take over. There is a wisdom in this that we, in our cleverness, have forgotten. Sometimes what we need most is not to solve the problem, but to step back long enough to let the deeper parts of ourselves do the work we cannot see. Doing nothing, then, is not the absence of progress. It is the soil from which progress grows. It is the empty space that allows insight to emerge. It is the silence that reveals the music. When we honor this space, when we stop pushing and start listening, we invite a different kind of intelligence to lead us, not the frantic voice of fear, but the quiet whisper of the soul. There is a strange kind of transformation that happens when we stop trying to make things happen. In the absence of constant motion, a space opens up, one we usually try to avoid. This space is not filled with answers at first. It is filled with discomfort, silence, a kind of void. But it is in this very space, this emptiness we fear so much, that something ancient and wise begins to stir. It is here, when all distractions fall away, that our deeper self, our truer self, emerges. It does not shout for attention. It waits patiently behind the noise. It has always been there. But to find it, We must stop performing. We are raised to become someone impressive, likable, successful. We construct our personalities like armor, carefully crafted to keep us safe from rejection, abandonment, or shame. We learn to read a room and become what is needed. We please, we charm, we impress. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, we forget who we were before we began to try so hard. We mistake the mask for the face, but the self, the true self, is not a performance. It is not something we construct, but something we remember, and it is remembered most clearly in stillness. When we do nothing, when we are no longer managing perception, we begin to encounter the parts of us that have been silenced. The child who was told they were too sensitive, the teenager who buried their creativity to fit in, the adult who traded authenticity for acceptance. These forgotten selves begin to return, not as problems to fix, but as exiled parts of our wholeness asking to be seen again. Doing nothing does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means pausing long enough to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What remains when I stop trying to be anything at all? Most people go their entire lives without answering this question. They move from role to role, adapting, adjusting, surviving. And yet, beneath all those masks, a quiet longing persists. The longing to be known, not for what we do, but for who we are. I once sat with a man who had built an empire. He had wealth, recognition, status. From the outside, he was the definition of success. But inside, he was haunted by a question he couldn't escape. Why do I feel like a stranger in my own life? He had achieved everything, yet he felt hollow. He realized he had spent so long performing, so long playing a part, that he no longer knew where the act ended and the real person began. It was only when he stopped, truly stopped, that he began to find his way back. It took silence, solitude, honest reflection. But slowly, the pieces of himself he had abandoned returned, and with them a sense of peace he had never known. The danger of constant doing is that it keeps us disconnected from our center. We become reactive instead of reflective. We make decisions from fear instead of alignment. We forget our own voice, drowned out by the noise of external expectations. But when we stop, when we do nothing with intention, the waters begin to clear. And from the depths, our real voice begins to rise. Not the voice shaped by fear, but the one rooted in truth. This is why some of the most powerful realizations come not during moments of activity, but in the spaces between. It is often when we are walking alone, sitting in silence, or lying awake at night that a buried insight suddenly rises. It wasn't created in that moment. It was uncovered. It had been waiting beneath the surface, obscured by all our effort. The soul does not reveal itself through striving. It reveals itself through surrender. And the self that emerges from that surrender is not fragile. It is solid, rooted, wise. It knows its value is not dependent on performance. It does not need applause to feel worthy. It does not chase validation, like a starving child. It knows it belongs simply because it exists. There is a powerful metaphor in the image of the seed. The seed does not rush its growth. It lies in darkness. It breaks open. It dies to what it was so it can become what it was always meant to be. That death, the letting go of the old, is painful, but it is necessary. In stillness, something in us breaks open too. The false self begins to fall away. The image we tried so hard to maintain starts to dissolve, and from that dissolution something new takes root, something more real. Most people fear this process. It feels like falling apart, but in truth, it is falling into place. Not the place our egos imagined, but the place our soul has always known. When we stop performing, we stop living someone else's script. We begin to hear our own inner author speaking again. There was a woman who spent years trying to be the perfect partner. She anticipated every need, suppressed every emotion, molded herself into what she thought her partner wanted. And still, the relationship ended. She was devastated, not just by the loss, but by the realization that she had lost herself along the way. In the aftermath, she did something radical. She did nothing. She didn't jump into another relationship. She didn't reinvent herself. She simply waited, sat with the silence, listened, and in that silence, she began to remember her own desires, her own voice, her own worth. She found, as many do, that her greatest fear, being alone with herself, was also her greatest gateway to healing. We are not taught to value these experiences. They do not fit neatly into resumes or social media profiles, but they are the crucibles where authenticity is born. They are where we stop asking, how can I be enough for them, and begin asking, am I being true to me? Doing nothing then becomes an act of radical honesty. It is where all the posturing falls away, where the ego softens and the soul steps forward, where we discover not just peace but power, not the loud aggressive power of control but the quiet enduring power of knowing who we are. A power rooted not in pretending but in presence. And this perhaps is the hidden miracle, that the more we stop trying to be someone, the more we become ourselves. And when we are fully ourselves, life responds, not because we are pushing, but because we are aligned. Things begin to fall into place not because we forced them, but because we became a true home for them to land. There is something quietly terrifying about doing nothing, especially in relationships. We have been taught that love must be chaste, earned, performed, that to be chosen we must be agreeable, that to be respected we must prove our worth. And so we make ourselves small. We say yes when we mean no. We tolerate treatment that violates our dignity, afraid that if we withdraw, if we stop trying, everything will fall apart. And yet, what if we allowed it to? In the space of silence, when we no longer respond, something profound begins to unfold. The way others treat us becomes a mirror, not of our value, but of their truth. When you stop engaging, when you stop fixing, explaining, defending, justifying, you give people the opportunity to show you who they really are. And this revelation, though sometimes painful, is one of the greatest gifts you can receive. 2. Often we confuse attachment with love. We cling, not because something is right, but because we fear the emptiness that might come if we let go. But doing nothing creates a sacred pause, a space where masks fall away. If someone truly values you, your silence will not push them away. It will awaken them. They will feel the distance and move toward you with respect and clarity. But if your absence makes no difference, then your presence was never truly being seen. There was once a woman who had spent years trying to mend a relationship with her sister. Every conflict she smoothed over. Every cold shoulder she warmed with kindness. Every rejection she answered with a new attempt. But one day she stopped. She didn't send the next message. She didn't call to explain herself again. She did nothing. And in that space, something shifted. The silence revealed what words had hidden for years. Her sister had never been interested in connection, only control. And in that quiet recognition, she felt grief, yes, but also freedom. We tend to fear the worst when we stop engaging. What if they forget us? What if we're abandoned? But what if we're not forgotten? What if we're finally remembered by ourselves? What if, in the quiet, we begin to see how long we've abandoned our own boundaries, our own intuition, our own needs, just to keep a connection alive? There is a kind of love that costs too much, a kind that requires us to shrink in order to be held. That is not love. That is survival disguised as loyalty. Doing nothing is not passive. It is not cruel. It is a declaration. I will no longer beg for love where it is not freely given. I will no longer distort myself to keep the peace while I am at war within. It is the beginning of a different kind of relationship, not only with others, but with yourself. A relationship built not on fear or obligation, but on mutual truth. When you stop chasing, the real shape of the relationship emerges. You begin to see, was this held together by genuine care or by my constant effort? Did this connection flow both ways? Or was I carrying it alone? These are not easy questions. They demand honesty. They demand courage. But without asking them, we stay trapped in cycles that drain our spirit. There's a deep psychological truth here. When we stop overfunctioning in a relationship, the system recalibrates. If someone is used to you doing all the emotional labor, your stillness will feel like a threat. They may try to provoke you, guilt you, shame you back into motion. This is not because they love you. It's because they love the version of you who allowed their comfort to come at the cost of your own. But if you remain in your silence, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, then only the relationships capable of surviving truth will remain. And those are the only ones worth keeping. A man once told me about his friendship with someone he'd known since childhood. They had history, shared memories, years of loyalty. But every time they spoke, he felt small, judged, dismissed. For years he laughed it off, told himself it was just how they were, until one day, after yet another conversation that left him depleted, he said nothing. He didn't call back. He didn't explain. He just stopped. And weeks passed. Then months. And the friend never reached out. At first, the silence hurt. But then it healed. He realized he had been watering a connection that no longer existed. Doing nothing helped him see what trying so hard had kept hidden. The silence reveals the truth, but it also reveals your strength. It reminds you that you are not at the mercy of how others treat you. You have the power to step back, to pause, to observe. And in that pause, you begin to reorient yourself. No longer are you orbiting around someone else's moods, approval, or affection. You return to your own center. This is not easy. The first moments of doing nothing can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff. Your nervous system may scream that you're in danger. That silence means loss. That withdrawal means abandonment. But those are echoes from the past. Wounds where love was conditional, where silence meant punishment. Now, as an adult, you reclaim silence not as a weapon, but as a sanctuary. A place where you no longer bleed to keep someone else warm. And strangely, in this space you begin to attract different kinds of people. Those who do not fear your boundaries. Those who do not require your silence to feel secure. Those who meet you not with conditions but with reverence. These connections are rare, but they become visible only when you stop dimming your light to stay connected to the wrong ones. This is the paradox. By doing nothing, you change everything. Not through control, but through clarity. Not by forcing others to change, but by changing the energy you bring to the relationship. You stop proving. You stop performing. You stop fixing. And in that absence, the truth walks in. Let those who value you rise to meet you. Let those who don't fall away. And in the meantime, stay rooted in the silence of your own truth. It will not lead you astray. It will teach you who you are, what you deserve, and what you no longer need to carry. The modern mind is obsessed with control. We are taught from the earliest moments of our development to plan, to strive, to organize, to build a sense of mastery over life's chaos. There is a certain comfort in that, a belief that if we just stay vigilant enough, work hard enough, strategize long enough, we can shield ourselves from disappointment and secure happiness. But life, in its truest and most mysterious form, does not obey these rules, it resists them. Life unfolds like a dream, strange, non-linear, and filled with moments that cannot be predicted or forced. And it is only when we let go of our death grip on control, when we surrender to the deeper intelligence moving beneath the surface, that we see how things can fall into place in ways our limited minds could never have planned. Control is an illusion we cling to when we are afraid. When we fear uncertainty, we grasp for certainty. When we fear being hurt, we try to prevent it by anticipating every outcome. When we fear loss, we micromanage love. But beneath this compulsion to control is a very human truth. We are terrified of vulnerability. Because to be vulnerable is to admit that we are not the master of all things, that we do not always know, that we cannot guarantee safety, permanence, or perfection. And so we tighten our grip, not realizing that in doing so, We often crush the very life we are trying to preserve. Imagine holding a handful of sand. If you keep your hand open, the grains sit gently in your palm, but clench your fist, and the sand slips through your fingers. So it is with life. The more we try to control outcomes, the more we create resistance within ourselves and in the world around us. The very act of clinging sends a message to the psyche. I do not trust life to support me. I do not trust myself to withstand what may come. But there is another path, one that seems, at first, counterintuitive. It is the path of surrender, not the passive surrender of defeat, but the active surrender of faith. A willingness to acknowledge that there are greater patterns at work than we can see. A willingness to trust that if we are rooted in authenticity, if we are honest with ourselves and others, then life will align, not always in the way we expected, but in the way we most deeply needed. This does not mean we become idle or apathetic. It means we learn to move from a different center. We act, yes, but not from fear. We make choices, but not to force an outcome. We set intentions, but we release attachment to how and when they manifest. And in that space, in that loosened grip, something miraculous begins to happen. Life starts to respond, not to our desperation, but to our alignment. I once spoke to a man who had spent years trying to make his business succeed. He had done everything right, studied the market, built the brand, worked long hours, followed every rule. But nothing seemed to click. Every door he pushed against remained shut. Until one day, exhausted and burnt out, he did something radical. He stopped. For weeks he did nothing. He let go of the need to control the outcome. He walked in nature, sat in silence. And in that space, a new idea came. Not from logic, but from intuition. It was risky. It went against all conventional advice, but it felt undeniably right. He followed it. Within months, everything shifted. Not because he tried harder, but because he aligned more deeply with something that was already waiting to emerge through him. We all have these inner nudges, these subtle intuitions that get drowned out by the noise of overthinking. When we do nothing, when we stop trying to steer every detail, we begin to hear them again. We reconnect with an inner compass that is far older than the mind, a deeper knowing that has always been with us. Some call it instinct, others call it soul. Whatever name we give it, the truth remains. It only speaks clearly when we are quiet enough to listen. But silence requires trust. It requires patience. It requires the courage to feel uncertainty without rushing to escape it. That is why so few people truly practice this. They mistake stillness for stagnation. But in truth, stillness is often the most fertile space of transformation. Just as the seed lies in darkness before sprouting, just as the moon wanes before it waxes, we too must honor the cycles of pause, not as obstacles, but as sacred parts of becoming. The deeper question here is not, how do I get what I want? But what part of me believes I must control everything to feel safe? Often the one who controls is a younger part of us, the child who lived through chaos, the adolescent who was shamed for failing, the adult who experienced heartbreak and now lives in fear of being vulnerable again. When we do nothing, these parts come forward. They ask to be seen, held, healed, and through that healing, the need to control begins to dissolve, not through force, but through compassion. Doing nothing is a confrontation with all the reasons we've been trying so hard. It is not a tactic. It is a return to the present moment, a return to the self behind the strategy, a return to the wisdom that does not scream, but whispers. When we surrender, we discover that life is not a machine to be operated, but a river to be trusted. Sometimes it flows fast and wild. Sometimes it slows to a crawl, but it always moves. Our task is not to control the river, but to listen to it, to respond to it, to know when to swim, when to float, and when to simply let the current carry us. There was a woman who had tried for years to become a mother. She underwent procedure after procedure, endured loss after loss. Each month became a battlefield between hope and despair. One day, broken from the inside out, she stopped trying. She didn't give up. She simply let go. She began to live again, to laugh, to dance. She found meaning beyond the struggle. And in time, life surprised her, not with what she expected, but with what she needed. She adopted a child, and in doing so, she became the mother she was always meant to be, not through force, but through surrender. This is the quiet revolution of doing nothing. It teaches us that we do not need to force life into submission. We only need to get out of the way, to create the space for what is already seeking us. And in that space, everything begins to fall into place, not because we made it happen, but because we finally allowed it to. The soul has its own rhythm, and its deepest transformations do not happen through noise, but through quiet. In the space beyond striving and forcing, there is a field, an inner clearing where clarity rises uninvited, and the next step becomes visible not by thinking harder, but by seeing more clearly. This is the paradox most people struggle with, that the moment you stop doing, you begin to see. When you stop scrambling to fix, to solve, to push, what's left is the raw, honest landscape of your life. And that is where everything begins to fall into place, not in reaction, but in awareness. Doing nothing is not about abandoning responsibility or withdrawing from life. It's about pulling your attention inward long enough to see what's truly driving your actions. Are you moving from fear or from alignment? Are you solving real problems or perpetuating old patterns? When you pause, you give your psyche time to catch up with your life. You create space for integration. And integration is the soil from which real change grows. The modern world resists this deeply. We are conditioned to react immediately, to respond to every message, to have an answer, to keep up. We live in a kind of psychological emergency room where stillness is mistaken for apathy and rest is interpreted as laziness. But the psyche does not bloom under pressure. The unconscious does not speak in emails and deadlines. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in sensations, in the subtle and often overlooked whispers of emotion. And those whispers can only be heard in silence. A man once told me he had reached a crossroads in his life. His job no longer fulfilled him. His marriage was strained. His health was deteriorating. He was, by all measures, successful. Wealth, status, recognition. But inside, he felt hollow. Every attempt to fix his life, therapy, books, podcasts, coaches, left him more confused. One day, out of sheer exhaustion, he stopped. Not in despair, but in surrender. He went into the woods. Not for a retreat or a plan. Just to walk. To be. For days he wandered with no agenda. The first day was hellish. His mind screamed for a to-do list. But on the third day, something softened. The noise inside started to dissolve. In that space, a question surfaced. What have I been running from? He wept, not from weakness, but from the weight of years spent moving in the wrong direction. And from that moment, his life began to rearrange itself, not instantly, not perfectly, but truthfully. That's what doing nothing can give you. The truth. Truth is not something we always want to see. It disrupts comfort. It challenges ego. But it also frees us. And when you stop all your attempts to manipulate, to escape, to control, the truth becomes visible. Sometimes it's as simple as this: I am not where I belong, or I've been pretending to be someone I'm not. Or, this relationship is not love, it is dependency. These are hard truths, but they are also portals, and you cannot walk through a portal you do not see. Doing nothing, then, is not absence. It is presence. Radical presence. It is meeting yourself exactly where you are, without judgment. And when you do that, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to trust yourself again. You begin to hear your intuition, not the voice of anxiety disguised as instinct, but the deeper, older voice that has always known your path. The voice that is quiet but steady. It doesn't shout, it waits. And the moment you stop distracting yourself, it speaks. One of the reasons this is so powerful is because most of us live in reaction to our pain, rather than in relationship with it. We are always trying to outrun discomfort, through work, relationships, achievement, perfectionism, numbing, and fantasy. But pain does not dissolve when ignored. It embeds itself. It becomes the script we live by, unconsciously repeating the past in different costumes. When you stop reacting and simply sit with what is, grief, rage, confusion, loneliness, you discover that these states are not enemies. They are messengers. They are trying to bring you back to yourself. They are trying to complete an emotional circuit that has been waiting, sometimes for years, to be acknowledged. This process is slow. It does not fit neatly into schedules or productivity systems. It will not win you applause, but it will bring you home. And when you return home to yourself, when you inhabit your own soul fully, life begins to organize itself around that. Inner clarity. You say no to what no longer fits. You stop chasing what was never meant for you. You feel your desires more honestly. And people around you respond. Some will leave. Some will resist. But the ones who stay, the ones who show up, when you are no longer bending to be liked, those are the ones worth building with. This is not magic. It is not a guarantee that every wish will be granted. It is deeper than that. It is the restoration of right relationship between your inner and outer life. It is the soul no longer fighting the ego, but guiding it. And once that alignment begins, everything around you begins to reflect it. Not because you force the world to change, but because you change the way you meet the world. There's a tree that grows in certain harsh climates. It looks stunted, almost broken. But its roots run deep, far deeper than most trees. It survives drought, wind, extremes. It does not look impressive at first glance, but it holds wisdom the others do not. Your stillness is like that tree. It may not be flashy, it may not be loud, but it grows roots that nothing can shake. And from those roots, new life emerges, not always where you expected, but always where you needed. Doing nothing, finally, is not about passivity. It is about receptivity. It is about becoming still enough to receive what life has been trying to give you all along, but could not because your hands were full of plans, expectations, and illusions. When you empty your hands, when you sit in the quiet of your own presence, life begins to pour in, not as a flood, but as a slow, sacred unfolding. So when all else fails, when the path seems hidden, when your soul feels heavy and confused, do nothing. Not because you're lost, but because you're ready to be found. And trust that in that stillness something greater is already rearranging itself for you.